Welcome to another episode of the Cloud Architects Podcast. You're here with myself, Nicholas Blank, and my co-host, Warren Dutoy and Chris Goosen.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back. I missed the last recording, and I'm really upset. But it's good to be here.
It is. It's another another Corona edition, I guess. Recording or episode of the show. But we're super excited today because we have someone who I've been personally wanting to get on the show for a long time, and someone whose work I've really enjoyed kind of watching over the last little bit, and I've used a lot of it myself. So we have Lee Ford on the show. Lee, do you want to say hi?
Hello everyone.
Well, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. It's afternoon time for you guys in the three of you in Europe and South Africa, and morning here in Texas. Lee, do you want to tell the folks at home, those who don't know you, kind of who you are, what you do?
Absolutely, yes. So my name's Lee Ford. I'm based in Birmingham in the UK. I'm a solution architect for a company called Simity, who predominantly are a Microsoft 365 house. And I mainly work in the Teams part of Microsoft 365. And that's around migrating people from Skype for Business to Teams, maybe helping with the sort of bits around the edges around automation and scripting and application development. So it's kind of as you know, Teams is such a wide net these days compared to something like Skype for Business, where it was just sort of meetings, telephony, and IM. Now it's pretty much the centerpiece of Microsoft 365. So yeah, that's pretty much where I spend most of my time working.
Awesome. Yeah, that's you're right. It is, and it's getting wider, right? It's not just where it was like 6 months ago or a year ago, and it just continues to improve and increase and get wider. And I noticed this week there was an announcement about some advanced licensing, which seemed to be ruffling some feathers, which we could probably get into. Warren might have some opinion on that. So did you come from a traditional, like from the Skype or Link world, or is Teams kind of where you got into working with, I guess, that productivity stack?
Yeah, so traditionally, I came from, when I first started, I did PBXs, so things like Mitel and Avaya PBXs.
Mitel, wow.
Yeah, a while ago now, but that's kind of where
You're
I
a
was.
Scary phone guy.
Yeah, I'm a scary phone. Yeah, you either come from Windows Server or you come from like telephones, and I came from the telephones side.
So true.
And you know, this new product Link, or well, it was OCS, I guess, came in, and people were like, oh, what's this scary new things? Then we want to have a bit of a poke around and see what it is, if it's any good, and that was kind of it really. From that point on, you know, I was just sort of, that's where I wanted to be, and you know, that's many years ago now. And yeah, so it's kind of been through the evolution of OCS, Link, obviously Skype for Business server, and Skype for Business Online, and then obviously Teams is where we are now. So yeah, it's kind of been there a little while now, been doing it, but traditionally it was a PBX, which does come in handy when you're doing PBX migrations, and you know, if they've got a PBX that you're familiar with, you go, oh great, yeah, I can help out here.
It's, to me, that is. So your background is very, very similar to Greg Sheridan, who I think you know, and he's a
Yes.
close friend of mine. We worked together for many years back in Australia. Very similar, but I think what makes that awesome is that people coming from that voice background, when you look at an SBC or like a telephony gateway, you just go, yeah, this makes perfect sense to me. Whereas for me, coming from, you know, a messaging background and the way like SMTP routing works, I log into an audio codes. I'm like, this stuff does not make any sense whatsoever to me, right? And so it's always interesting when I kind of need help on a Sonos or something, or whatever they call themselves this week. I call Greg for help, but then it works the other way as well, right? He, you know, if he has some DNS or some weird, it's always DNS, but if he has some weird thing that he likes to troubleshoot, then, you know, he'll ping me, and so we've had that kind of collaborative relationship for a long time. But it's fascinating because I've never met anyone else who's come that far along out of that kind of PBX Mitel world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you know, I remember when I first started many years ago, over 20 years now, it was running cables for telephones, you know, where I sort of first started, you know, and that just is unheard of now. It's just seems such a far away thing, really. Whereas now everything's virtual. You can work from home, you can work anywhere, and with coronavirus, it's it's more than welcome, isn't it? Really. So.
And those big cabling cabinets with those pairs, and you got that like 100 pair cable or 400 pair
Yes.
cable, and there was like literally it was like this thick, and then you had to
absolutely,
find
shielded
which
cable.
pair it was. Toner and probe.
Tone set, yeah, absolutely, yeah, that's it. Yeah, I remember all that. I think I've probably still got the tools somewhere, but every so often someone will go, oh, I've got an old telephone line that needs moving or something like that, and you still always keep the tools just in case you need them.
Hey, it's a super
That's why
handy
it was called the trunk.
yeah, it's a super handy skill set. That's where I started, right? My old man still does do data networks, and now he's moved away from like PBX stuff and phone cabling, right? But it's still data networking because obviously all of the stuff runs off a data backbone now, and fiber. And I mean, I was in like primary school. Every school holiday, that's what I was doing. I was pulling cables and terminating cabinets and stuff, right? And I think starting at that sort of very, very, very ground level gives you a real appreciation of where we've gotten to now. So yeah, that's super fascinating. And I forget the point. Oh, I was going to say it's a super handy skill set because now when I need a Cat 6 drop in a room somewhere, I'm like, I'll just do that. It's good.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm getting really good at fixing drywall holes now too, because every time I need to do this, I need to cut a hole in my wall, and so you
drywall. We've got bricks here with cement.
I was going to say much faster bricks. Yeah.
So moving back to Teams, I guess. So we're in this place now where obviously Teams adoption has skyrocketed over the last, since March, I guess, right? And like every time I look at the numbers, they're just astounding. I mean, last time I saw it was like 75 million, I think, but it's probably gone up since then. What about the PBX side of Teams? Are you seeing, in your experience, are customers using it? Is it something that people are actively getting rid of their whatever is left via MyTel type stuff and using Teams?
Absolutely, that's the case. Not and pre-COVID, that was also the case that people are looking to move away from a fixed phone on a desk. They want the ability to have that their desk or their landline number, but be able to answer that call on their mobile if they're working from home or wherever they are in the world, they can sort of take those calls. And especially now with COVID, where offices are either closed or running at reduced capacity, there's a lot of desk phones sitting there idle. And people aren't able to use their telephones. So, yeah, absolutely, we're seeing a massive increase of people wanting to move away from traditional PBXs and move over to Teams, where it just gives them flexibility that they can just use the number or wherever. And we are seeing a sizable uptake in telephony. And not only is it people wanting it, but they're wanting it yesterday. They want it now. With COVID, it's gone from being maybe we'll do that in 12 months, 18 months. We'll ride out our PBX as long as we can. It's like we need it now. We need we've got key numbers that need to be terminating on users working from home. Our PBX can't do it. How can you help? So absolutely.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I think that is interesting, right? Because if you think about all of the logistics that go into a company just closing its premises, right? It's easy to go, okay, well, guys like us, we've been lightly working remotely. And I should say folks like us have been working remotely for a while. And so we're used to being able to just carry our number around with us, whatever. But if you think about the situation where, you have some sort of inbound calling number or reception number or something like that, like the logistical, and I had to think about this just the other day because someone asked me a question about, they're like, oh, well, we have to shut up our office, and so like someone has to look after that phone number. Like, what do we do with that, right? And it's interesting, right? I mean, if it's just a line sitting, terminating in your premises, that's going to be a lot harder to do. I guess call forwarding is always an option, right? But still makes it much more convenient when you can do something like that, bring it into Teams.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's we're having customers at the moment literally just forwarding calls to Microsoft Teams number just as a quick win. With the prospect of moving those numbers properly and porting those numbers at a later date, but just with time as the essence, they need to need to move across quickly. Yeah, so absolutely. That, like you say, there's a lot of logistics involved with closing an office, and telephony is absolutely one of those ones, especially when you've got things that, emergency helplines and things like that, that, you can't have downtime, you can't have people not answering the phone. It is a key service, really.
Okay. So, sorry, Nick, you go ahead there.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Lee, since you have the scary phone guy background, and we say scary phone guy because as Windows people, we look at like all the standards that you guys just find so easy and codecs and everything else, and it's like, no, that's scary. So scary phone guy. So if you look at the commercial side of the house, if you look at the cost of a traditional PBX and those folks now moving over to Teams, do you find that there's a massive upside from a moving my voice over to Teams point of view that those folks are getting that they couldn't get on the traditional PBXs of the world?
From a cost perspective, there probably is some I mean, there's obviously two types of telephony in Teams. You've got calling plans, and then you've also got the direct routing. Certainly, with direct routing, that there is a cost. There can be a cost saving by moving to that rather than sticking with the PBX. Coming up for renewal, and a lot of the times, they might be on E5, in which case they've already got a phone system built in. And I think recently it's been announced that in some regions there's also minutes bundled into the E5. That all of a sudden is like, well, we're already paying for it. Why are we not using it? So yeah, we see that people are like, oh yeah, it's a win-win really. We've already got the licenses. We need to replace our PBX. Teams is the natural choice. When it comes to Teams from a functional level fulfilling the need of the PBX, it's ever improving. Things like call queues and auto attendance are getting better. The features are being added almost all the time. There is obviously going to be cases where, well, my old PBX did this in a particular way, we need the same, and you can't always offer that, but you might be able to offer something that the old PBX couldn't do that may be better. So it's always a balance between managing what you can do and what they should probably do with regards to PBX replacement. But yeah, I think a lot of people are like, we've got licenses, let's use it, let's go.
But what about the people that don't have licenses? I mean, like, I'm finding it sometimes that Teams actually works out more expensive, number one. And I guess that sort of like leads me to my next question is like, so in South Africa, we got no choice, right? We have to use direct routing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because routing apparently is a bad word in some parts of the world.
Only in Australia.
Yeah. But anyway, so like we've got no choice, right? So that's fine.
Yes.
I mean, but like if you have to consider what phone system costs on an E3, it's actually pretty expensive. I mean, you can get a hosted PBX number like through a little portal and you can click, and it's really not there.
Yes.
However, like if you have to look at call quality dashboard, and the improvements that have been done there. Your article, which was released a month ago, or was it yesterday? No, a month ago.
No,
22nd of June.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great article, man.
Yeah.
And you can't do that sort of like with a hosted PBX or something like that. And you wouldn't be able to get these sorts of statistics. And I guess having it all in one box. So my questions would be like, are there any features that you think Microsoft's forgotten about? Or... I mean, like, I find that they're really, really, like, that Teams admin center is getting packed full of stuff every day. And I think it's going well. But I mean, do you think anything's missing? Do you think anything's, like, do you think that direct routing should have been configured with the admin center by now?
Yeah, I mean, they are adding stuff. Yeah, absolutely. So I think previously, certainly when it first launched, it was pretty much PowerShell is the way you need to do a lot of it.
Only, yeah.
Yeah, at PowerShell only. And now they've added things like normalization rules and voice routes, and I mean, I'm a PowerShell guy, so I always generally still do it via PowerShell. But I'm pretty sure you could configure the whole thing for direct routing, maybe not all of it, but I'd say 95% of it via the admin center now, and I think that's intentional because they want people that maybe aren't PowerShell experts to want to be able to just quickly click, or even just make changes. They want to be able to click and make a couple of tweaks, something like a normalization rule, regular expression. not everyone's going to know what regular expressions are. They've made that easier where it builds the regular expression for you, a bit like they did with Scott for Business Server. So
there's a reason I failed my 333 exam. Those damn regular expressions, man.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not an expert in regular expressions. I do kind of get enough, but yeah, even I think everyone still has to use some sort of online tool, just because I need this particular pattern, and it's when you break it down, it makes sense. But then when you put it all together, and just look at a string, it's like, oh, hang on a minute, what's happening here?
So much.
So yeah, I think it's getting their admin center. I think with direct routing, they're adding pretty cool features like LMO, so local media optimization, where the media from the Teams client doesn't have to go up to Office 365. It can go
media
via
bypass,
media bypass via the local SBC rather than having to go out and back in. So there are improvements. I think there probably could be improvements in the voice applications, things like call pickup. So they have a term, I think it's called group pickup, which is kind of I wouldn't call it pickup group personally, like you would on a traditional PBX. It's more, it rings if you divert your call to another user and their phone doesn't ring but it audibly flashes, that's classed as a pickup, call pickup. That's not really a pickup group in my eyes. But so there's things that I think they could potentially improve on. But I think on the whole, I think it's if someone was going, we want to move away from our PBX, we want to go to Teams, I really wouldn't have any hesitation in going, yeah, sure, let's go. I don't think they'd be like, oh, hang on a minute, are you doing this or are you doing that? With direct routing, it just it kind of answers all those edge case questions around things like DECT phones or analog devices or anything like that you have to keep. And you couldn't do that with calling plans, and all of a sudden direct routing gives you that extra option.
Yeah,
so
true.
I think both of you guys have actually kind of queued up or segued the question I was gonna ask earlier, which is, how is Teams differing in the regions though, right? And this was actually going to be a question to both Warren and you, Lee, because I know like here in the US, we just take things for granted that because when the feature comes out, we just have it. But there are other regions, I know Australia, one of those regions as well, that sometimes lags a little behind what's possible, what's not possible. So, I mean, are we getting to a point where things are being released across everywhere, like all the regions now? Or Warren, you alluded to the fact that maybe in South Africa right now, you can only do direct routing. So there's no call plan stuff available?
No, so you see, it's a complicated thing, because you see, in order to become a telco, you need like a telco license, right? And like apparently ICASA doesn't want to give Microsoft one, or whatever the case would be. So they can't like sort of legally be a calling plan provider, or at least that's sort of what they've said when Microsoft gives you an answer about whether calling plans are available or not.
So ICASA being the governing body for
correct, yeah, okay, governing body for communications in South Africa. So so, but again, the strange thing is obviously, and Lee, you could probably attest to this, is that even though calling plans are available in the States, I mean, when I was working at the Teams booth at Ignite last year, I got so many questions about direct routing purely because guys wanted to use their existing Cisco call manager, or they had this massive investment in an existing PBX that they couldn't just get rid of right now. And they wanted to connect the two together, and direct routing is the way. I mean, calling plan sort of, so direct routing is like sort of like a multi-tier approach when it comes to that sort of integration, because these guys, like, they don't, I mean, you'd be surprised how many people, like, all over the world, I mean, like, Jabber is such a thing, man. I don't know how or why, but Jabber is a thing.
Yeah. I've never touched it, but yeah.
It's for free though, right?
It's not for free.
It's
no.
Not.
It's an on-prem investment. They use, and like, I don't even know if they have a proper hybrid model. As far as if you want to move from, let's say, Jabber to WebEx, which is, hosted, and then you get your calling plan from WebEx. I don't even know if there's a hybrid model. So I don't know.
Yeah, so on the calling plans versus direct routing, so calling plans are available in I think 8 countries. I don't think any have been added for at least a couple of years, and I think Japan and maybe Australia were the last couple to be added. And in those locations, I think they had to partner with, certainly in Australia, they had to partner with, I think, Telstra. So Microsoft don't actually provide the service, Telstra do, and there's like a specific SKU you have to have. It's not your traditional license, it's like a Telstra-based license. So that way they've kind of got around having to be a provider in that location. I think there's some. I remember seeing somewhere that they are still planning to roll out to other countries, but like I said, there hasn't been any for a couple of years. But even in the UK, we're finding that most people go direct routing, and that's because, like you say, you have a PBX, then you want to do a gradual migration, or you've got an existing agreement with a provider that's too cost prohibitive to actually want to move away from it when you add on the calling plan cost. And typically, like I say, calling plans, we're finding that people are rather put that money into an SBC and stick with their current provider, and it gives them the extra flexibility to switch providers down the road and whatnot. So that's what we're finding.
Which leads me to my next question. Okay, is why audio codes? Like, I'm also an audio codes guy. Like, I mean, really, like the great products and stuff. However, they're not cheap. If you have to look at like a any node SBC, I mean, that thing's like literally a tenth of the price.
Is it really? I've never actually. Yeah. So I know. Do you know Randy Chapman? He's talked about any node before. He works where I do, and he keeps saying, "Oh, you should have a look one day." And he's got a blog post about it, but
it's not nearly as pretty. I mean, the console looks like AWS.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, to be fair, the audio codes UI used to look horrendous back in.
No, it was bad, eh? Yes.
And so when people go, "Oh, it's really bad hard to use now," I was thinking, you want to use it like 5 years ago? It was something else. So. Yeah, I've never touched a ribbon. I think where I work, there's a kind of a 50-50 split between audio codes and ribbon expertise. I'm sure ribbon is just as good as audio codes. It's just I've always been on the audio codes side of the camera.
It's difficult to sort of transition from one sort of sort of provider to the next, because they are very different. And like, if you look at interfaces and commands and what has to be run on and the way like the flows work and what one thing's called on the one side and one thing's called on the other side, you can get incredibly confused. I mean, sometimes they don't, I mean, like on any node, it's called a trunk, right? Yeah. But audio codes doesn't really use the word trunk ever.
Unless it's ISDN, I think, which technically is a trunk, but other than that, it's. I mean, it's they were like SRDs and SIP interfaces and all those.
Correct.
All those good things.
This is I've always wondered this, and it's always fascinated me. Right, I wonder if this is also a little bit of a regional thing, because I know, like, ever since I've lived here in the US, it's always been audio codes, right? Like where I've worked in the past, the guys people don't even look at anything else. But when I was working in Australia, every partner I ever worked for, it was always Sonos Ribbon, right, as they're now called. So I wonder how much of that is regional versus just.
I think it is.
It's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In South Africa, they use asterisks. Because it's free.
Yeah.
So shifting gears just a little bit here, so Lee, one of the things I think, and so probably the reason we got to know each other was I was working on a project this would have been probably about a year ago now. And I was trying to do some funky stuff with like exporting conversation history out of Teams conversations. And I was, at the time, the way I was trying to do this was I had done a discovery search of the mailbox, of the team mailbox, dumped that to PST, and then I was interrogating the PST through PowerShell to try and pull the messages out, which actually did kind of work, except the problem was I couldn't figure out how to link the threads together, right? So I could pull out the individual messages, but they would just be individual messages. They weren't threaded in any way. They just have funky GUIs, and there doesn't seem to be any key that links them together. So I reached out to Greg Sheridan, and I was like, hey, Greg, here's what I'm trying to do. I realize this is really weird, but I have a specific use case that I need to work on, and this is what I need to do. And he was like, oh, Lee has a script for that. I was like, what, really? He's like, yeah, check this out. And he sent me your backup team script, which then just blew my mind because it basically did everything that I needed to do. So I guess one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask you was, you have a ton of stuff on your blog, and to me, still, it's the go-to resource for anyone who wants to do any PowerShell stuff with teams. I always send them to your blog. Comsverse, the virtual conference that was on a couple of weeks ago, I actually presented a Teams PowerShell session at the conference, and I demoed a bunch of stuff, and I had like a whole block snippet of your script, which was credited. But I was, and I kind of sent everyone to your blog. I was like, look, if you need stuff that involves PowerShell and Teams, you got to go to Lee's blog, right? Do you have some sort of developer background? I mean, we talked about you coming out of the PBX world, but the way I think you approach a lot of the coding, I mean, it's actually pretty incredible. And you look at the stuff and you go, this stuff was written by someone who is, a full-time developer. But that's not the case with you, though, right?
No, it's absolutely not a full. There's bits that I would need to do it for paid work where we just need to script something or write a report or something like that. But typically, it has been I'm doing either how do I do something, or I'm doing this thing that's taking me a really long amount of time to do manually. How can I script? How can I automate it? And it is purely just not a hobby is probably not the right word, but it is just something I enjoy doing. I like writing a bit of code. But certainly, I'm not a formal developer. I haven't been on any training courses, or my job title isn't developer. So right. It's purely just a passion for wanting to do it, really, and I quite enjoy writing a bit of code.
And so before, I think, because I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on the Graph PowerShell SDK, but before we jump into that, do you mind just running through a couple of the scripts that you actually do have on your blog? Okay. Just for folks who haven't come across your work yet and are sitting there going, how am I going to solve this problem? So you have the backup team script, right? Which is essentially just goes and interrogates the org. And I haven't used it in a little while now, but it goes and interrogates all the teams in the org and basically dumps all of the content into an archive, right?
Correct. Yes. So what it will do is you log in. So you run the PowerShell script, you log into it, and then it will list all the teams within your tenant. And then you choose, okay, I want to back up this team, or you might go, actually, I want to back up all the teams. And then it will go through and it will grab the team, it will download all the files within that team, all the chat history, any settings that were set against the team, basically anything within that team, and puts it in a zip file, like say, including all the attachments. And what it allows you to do then is actually, if you wanted to, you could recreate that team on the same tenant or a different tenant, and it would try and upload the files back into the team. And if it's the same tenant, it would add the members back in and the owners back in of that original team. So it's a way.
So why do I need to go buy Fpoint then?
Well, I'm not offering any SLAs or anything like that. Use it at your own risk. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of just I was just thought this should be something that's just built into the admin center. I should be able to just go, I want to kind of capture this team, download it as a file, as a backup, and then I've got that for all eternity. And if that team goes bye by accident or whatever, then you've got a copy of it at a set point. So that's kind of the need really there. And yeah, it was great fun writing it, to be honest with you. It's written in PowerShell with, I think it's just Graph. I don't think there's any Teams PowerShell. It's purely just Graph, but not the SDK.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Yes,
that's awesome.
And here's why I think it's so cool, right? Is because, and again, my history or knowledge on this is probably about 6 months out of date now, because I haven't been doing migrations for a little bit now with my new role. But historically there's a challenge. There's been a challenge in getting conversation history out of Teams, right? There's no real like API that you can query. Or at least there wasn't, I guess, at the time, where you can query to get that data out or to replay it. And so what I've seen certain vendors doing is their approach is that they use there's a Slack migration thing that they use to replay the conversations back, but you lose all the metadata, so you end up having the author of the conversation of every chat is whatever the migration service account is, right? And what's super sneaky about that is that when I saw this demo, they had named their migration service account like a person's name, like John Smith. And I was like, well, hang on, why is every conversation authored by John Smith? And I'm like, oh no, John Smith is our service account. I'm like, well, that's even worse. Right?
Yeah. At least if it was like migration tool or something, that'd be a bit more obvious to know that, oh yeah, this isn't actually.
Exactly. And I just feel like it's so sneaky because they were trying to like, I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I just feel like it was kind of a way for them to not draw attention to the fact that and I picked up on it straight away. And so the other approach obviously is you dump everything into a file archive like you do with an HTML file that then can just be viewed later, right? Which I think is pretty. Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. Yeah. So it's just a HTML file, and it kind of almost looks like a conversation. You've got sort of the chat bubbles, if you want to think of it like that, and then you can kind of, when you look, okay, let's have a look at conversation history. You can either open an HTML file, or if you restore that team or recreate that team, I guess, into the tenant, it will then be available within that team as an HTML file that you can just open within Teams and look at the previous conversation history. So you're not kind of lying to anyone that that conversation took place naturally. You know that the previous conversations are in this file if you do need to go back and view them. So, but the main reason for that is more just we want to look at a team, we want to look at the old conversation from a backup purposes rather than a recreation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense. But I think there's definitely sort of an application for it in backup / migration places as well, right? If you need to move between tenants or whatever, this is a really handy way to say, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and we can give you an archive of all of that stuff. Because sometimes the conversations within a team are not super valuable to anyone, like from a longevity perspective, right? Like everyone talking about their lunch order isn't something that the business needs to keep, but there may be some other conversations within there that are really handy, and so be able to get them in that archive is pretty cool. So yeah, thank you for that. Oh, there was another one. You have just a backup Teams config one as well, right?
Backup Teams config. Yeah, so that effectively does it uses the Skype Online PowerShell, but you can also do the Teams Online PowerShell now. But it basically connects via PowerShell and downloads all the configs and all the policies and all pretty much any configurable option within Teams from a PowerShell point of view. And then you can download that, and it puts it into another archive file. And in each type of, let's say, there's a client policy or something like that, you can open the HTML file for that client policy and view it kind of in table format. So it's a bit easier to view than looking through a PowerShell export. And what I've also done is included the PowerShell exports, the CLI XML files, which means that you can then go back and compare a backup to a live service, and then it will just go through line by line and compare any differences. So if you someone's made a change, you can go, well, let's see what it was compared to this backup I took 2 weeks ago. Hang on a minute, this policy has changed, and now this value that was set to true is now set to false.
Son of a, he's going to get fired. That oak's going chiz.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the whole reason you wrote it, right?
No. It was more just for my own. Just keep an eye on things that should be changing. Yeah, so it works quite
How
well.
difficult was it for you to get going with Graph and moving away from what PowerShell couldn't do to digging around in Graph, figuring out what you wanted to solve in terms of problems, and then figuring out how to put that all together?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a challenge to begin with, just because at the time there was no PowerShell SDK, and not being a formal developer, having to work out things like OAuth and authorization codes and tokens and all that sort of stuff to be able to log into Graph. Yeah, that took a little bit of time, but it was worth it in the end, and it is certainly something that I do find useful almost on a daily basis to know about. So, but yeah, that was the biggest challenge, was kind of getting into Graph. Once you're in Graph, it's kind of just like any other API really. You're sending requests to an API with a token saying, I'm allowed to ask this question, and then you're getting data back, or you're placing data or putting data in Graph, and you're getting a response back to that. So that was a bit of a, from going from dedicated commandlets that have already been pre-built, almost having to create your own commandlets or your own sort of custom connections and things like that. Yeah, that took a little bit more time, not coming from that background.
Very cool. I mean, so I'm going to go away completely off on a tangent. Tell me about the Spider-Man in the background. I'm a huge Spider-Man fan.
I'm not actually into. So my kids are, but I'm not really into super.
Well, he's a good guy. He's going to grow up to be a champ.
Yeah. So I'm not really. I'm not into super. I probably should be saying things like that, but I'll probably get kicked off podcasts and things. But yeah, I'm not really into superhero films, or I've never seen Star Wars. There's a lot of things. Yeah, I know it's
okay. But then there must be something that you're into, right? Like, it can't just be Graph.
Yeah, no, I just watch Graph movies. Yeah, and yeah,
So you're a YouTube fundy. That's your thing.
Yeah. I just watch YouTube tutorials every day. But no, I don't know. I quite like documentaries and science fiction. I think so. I probably should watch Star Wars, but things like that. I'm happy to watch that. But yeah, superhero movies. I have tried, but they just don't do it for me.
So getting back to slight tangent, squirrel. Well, let's get back to Graph. I think what you've said is kind of exactly been my experience, right? Because I don't really have any formal development background, but I'm a massive fan of automation in PowerShell, and I literally if I could find a job where all I did was just PowerShell all day long, I'd be super happy. It was quite funny. I was this is just a little story here. Nick and I were at Ignite one year, and we were talking to a mutual friend of ours, Doug, and I just met him, and I didn't really know what he did. And we started talking. He was like, "Oh, I like PowerShell." I said, "Yeah, so do I. I wish I could find a job where I just did PowerShell all day long." And he was like, "That's my job. That's what I do." And he actually ends up, running a whole bunch. He had a company that he did started to build some apps and stuff, and it was all PowerShell based, which is very cool. But I also found it really hard or really difficult to when you start working with JSON and having to kind of parse and construct those queries, it becomes really difficult or can be interesting, right, to learn. But then with the Graph PowerShell SDK that's come out in the last 6 months or so, that's made that significantly easier, because now I feel like you have all of the Graph magic without any of the having to construct invoke web request
absolutely
JSON, right? How have you found that? I mean, I've seen you've been doing some work with it and on it, and I think you actually have some tutorial videos on your blog about it as well.
Yeah, I think I have a getting started video and just an accompanying blog post. It's pretty good actually. It takes away a lot of the, like I was saying previously, where you had to work out how do I authenticate with Graph using PowerShell. You don't have to do any of that. You effectively type connect -graph and say what. So in Graph you have these things called scopes, which kind of like permissions. What do I want to have access to in Graph? You specify those, and then you log in with a device code like you do on other PowerShell modules, and you're connected, and that's it. And then you can just run, get -mg user or something like that. So there's always an MG prefix, bit like there is a CS prefix with Skype and Teams. And it effectively, takes away a lot of the guesswork and kind of having to construct, like you say, JSON objects to post. And when you're requesting data, it's literally just writing that it feels much more natural as from a PowerShell point of view rather than having to kind of create your own wrapper for graph. No, I think it's very, very useful, really cool. I do probably need to put it into some of my scripts actually, because I need to go back and update them to use the module. But no, it's super cool. I don't think it's 1.0 just yet, but they are working on it, and it's improving all the time, and it's super cool.
Yeah, I definitely I really like it, and what I love about it is that because I'm a Mac user, I can do everything on my Mac now, right? Like I mean I still do, but technically I don't need a VM to be able to do things anymore, because I can access all of Graph through this module that runs great in PowerShell Core, and I can do it straight off my Mac. And that was part of the demo that I did on the at Comsverse, was I took a script that another MVP, Nathan O'Brien, had written, and I ported it to use, or I ported as much of it as I could to use the SDK, and then I ran the one in Windows, and then I ran the other one on my Mac. And it's, for one, it's significantly quicker, right, to run than versus the module. But yeah, it's fantastic stuff. I'm super excited by it. I'm struggling a little bit with the lack of documentation on some things, because it's not as easy to find. If you want to interrogate a particular property somewhere, to go and find exactly how you do that, you kind of have to dig through the API reference and then try and work it out. At least that's how I've been doing it. But
for Graph, we're talking the module.
No, for the SDK.
For the SDK, yeah. So the SDK isn't sort of hand built. It's kind of auto generated.
Right.
I think it might be called Open API or something like that, where they use a method where it's kind of looking at a graph and working out, there's a graph endpoint for user. Okay, based on that, I can create a list of commandlets to wrap around that API call. So they're not having to write each commandlet manually, because I think there literally are thousands of them. Mm-hmm. So you're probably going to struggle to get documentation like you would, let's say, with a traditional PowerShell module that's been written by someone. So that's where you're going to struggle. I think you're kind of almost looking to look at the graph API reference to work out what the object is going to be when you run your request, and kind of work backwards from there, really. So
that's I guess that's been my approach of trying to kind of figure it out, and I eventually will kind of get to that way of thinking. I think it's just it's a familiarity thing, right? If you're looking to find anything related to a user, you'd be, in the Azure module, it'd be, get Azure AD user, and it's going to be a property in there somewhere, but it doesn't translate like that to the SDK. You can't do get MG user and see all of those same properties. Sometimes you have to query a different command, I've found, but I think once we start wrapping our head around that, it's just going to be superb, because now it really becomes cross-platform. That's really good for me. So I want to kind of move any future scripts I write or develop
same here.
to do that, because it just seems to make a lot more sense. So
as long as there's no XML, as long as XML's out of the picture, life is good. I'll take JSON over XML any day.
Yeah, no, I think it's all moving that way, isn't it? It's all JSON and open standards, and XML is an open standard, but it's everything's heading that way, and things like you say, being not fixed, or I've got to use Windows PowerShell for this module. I think slowly but surely that's moving away. Like in the Teams preview PowerShell module, they've added the ability to connect to Skype for Business, so you can connect to Skype for Business PowerShell using Core rather than having to use Windows PowerShell. So they are moving there slowly, which is cool.
So we're coming up to the top of the show, and before we let you go, we'd like to ask you, what is it that you'd like to plug, either in terms of Twitter handles, blogs, anything else that you'd like to call out? Absolutely anything goes, as long as we get a cut of it.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Lee, LEE _Ford FORD. My blog is lee-ford.co.uk. I'm not sure else I've got anything else to blog. To plug other than my blog, to be honest with you. Twitter on my blog, you'll probably find everything that I'm working on, really. So yeah, that's it from me.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we really appreciate having you on the show, and maybe we'll do a follow-up sometime, kind of see how things are going and what else you're busy with. But really appreciate you coming on and taking the time.
No worries. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, geez, we got to talk about Yo. and we got to talk about adaptive cards, and we got to talk about all that stuff. So yes, thank you so much for the time.
No worries at all.